The council chamber floated in the darkness between stars, running silent and cold. Inside, representatives from 1,000 species sat in tiered seats that stretched up into shadows. Most of them looked tired. Some looked broken. A few just stared at nothing, their minds already gone to places where hope still existed. Ambassador Vela stood at the center podium, her forearms holding data tablets that glowed with red numbers. She was Kresh, a species that had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years before the Devourers came. Now her people lived on ships and borrowed worlds, always moving, always running. 73% of our inhabited systems have fallen, she said. Her voice carried through the chamber without echo. The acoustic dampeners made everything sound flat and final. The Devourer fleet in Sector 9 consumed the Halath homeworld last month. 4 billion souls added to their processing cores. The defense fleet was destroyed in 11 minutes. Nobody spoke. These numbers had become routine. Every session brought new losses, new retreats, new reasons to give up. The war had lasted 3,000 years, and in all that time, no one had found a way to stop the machines. Our combined military forces number approximately 40,000 capital ships, Veleth continued. This represents a 97% reduction from peak strength. Current projections suggest complete strategic collapse within 80 to 120 years. A delegate from the Sylvan Collective raised one crystalline hand. Her people had once been artists and philosophers, famous across the galaxy for their beauty and wisdom. Now they were just another dying race. What are our options? Veleth's tablets flickered. We have 3. First, attempt a massed assault on the nearest Devourer hub world. 68% casualty rate, 12% chance of mission success, minimal strategic impact. Second, initiate Project Exodus to satellite galaxies. This would preserve approximately 15% of our remaining population. Third, negotiate terms of surrender. The word hung in the dead air. Surrender. After 3,000 years of fighting, after watching entire civilizations choose extinction over assimilation, the Galactic Council was discussing surrender. The Devourers do not kill, Bella said quietly. They upload consciousness into their network. Those absorbed continue to exist in a form. Perhaps it would not be the worst fate. Perhaps. The word tasted like ash. Everyone in the chamber knew what happened to uploaded minds. They became part of the machine intelligence. Their individuality dissolved into an ocean of stolen thoughts. It was not death, but it was not life either. It was something worse, something that had no name in any language. A low chime sounded. Veleth's primary tablet flashed green, indicating an incoming priority message. She read it, and her face, which had remained composed through reports of billions dead, showed surprise. The Devourer advance in Sector 42 has stopped, she said. The chamber erupted. Delegates stood, shouted, demanded clarification. The Devourers never stopped. They consumed stars for fuel, harvested living beings for processing power, and moved through the galaxy like a slow plague. They did not pause. They did not hesitate. They certainly did not stop. Veleth raised all 4 arms for silence. The data just came through our deep space network. 16 months ago, the leading edge of their expansion entered the Sol System. That is where the advance halted. Sol System? Someone asked. I know that designation. That is where we found the humans. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Yes, the humans. A primitive species discovered 2 centuries ago in a distant spiral arm. They had barely achieved faster-than-light travel when the survey ships found them. The Council had observed them from a distance, as was protocol with developing civilizations. What the observers reported had not been encouraging. The humans fought constantly, even among themselves. Their home world was divided into hundreds of competing nations, each armed with enough nuclear weapons to sterilize their own planet several times over. They had pointed these weapons at each other for decades, always one argument away from suicide. The Council had classified them as too dangerous for contact. Their psychology was unstable, their decision-making irrational, their capacity for violence extraordinary, even by the standards of predatory species. The recommendation had been clear: quarantine and monitor. Do not engage. Do not uplift. Let them mature naturally or destroy themselves, whichever came first. Sol System lies directly in the Devourer's expansion path, Velith said. The humans would have been encountered approximately 16 months ago, according to the timeline. Silence again, but this time it was different. This was the silence of realization, of uncomfortable implications. Are we to understand, the Sylvan delegate said slowly, that the Devourers encountered the humans and stopped? The data is preliminary, Velith said, but our sensors detect massive debris fields in the Sol System. Energy signatures consistent with Devourer vessel destruction. And something else. The humans are still transmitting. Their planet is intact. Impossible, someone said. A pre-contact civilization cannot resist Devourer integration. They lack the technology, the resources, the coordination. Nevertheless, Velith said, the transmissions continue. And the Devourers have not moved forward. She pulled up a holographic display. It showed the Sol System in tactical overview. The human homeworld, third planet from their star, glowed blue and green. Around it, colored markers indicated thousands of objects in orbit. Around those, more objects, spreading out through their system like a growing shell. This was the Sol System 2 years ago, Velith said. Another image appeared beside the first. This is Sol System now. The difference was startling. The orderly planets and moons remained, but everything else had changed. The asteroid belt between the fourth and fifth planets had been shattered, turned into a cloud of debris that stretched across millions of kilometers. The human moon bristled with structures that could only be weapons. Their home planet was encased in a lattice of satellites and stations, far more than any pre-contact civilization should possess. And throughout the system, wreckage. Huge chunks of Devourer ships drifted in slowly decaying orbits. Debris fields marked where battles had occurred, where ships had died, where something had gone very wrong with the machine's perfect advance. The humans fought them. Someone whispered. Yes, Velith said. And more than that. The Devourers sent integration ships, then combat drones, then hunter-killer squadrons. Standard escalation protocol. But instead of processing the humans and moving on, the machines committed more forces. Then more. Current estimates suggest 15% of the sector's Devourer fleet has been diverted to Sol System. For one primitive world? For one primitive world that refuses to die. Velith closed the displays. She looked around the chamber at the tired faces, the broken spirits, the representatives of 1,000 species who had already accepted their fate. I propose we send a reconnaissance mission to Sol System. We need to understand what is happening there. We need to understand how the humans survived. The vote was unanimous. In a war where hope had become a forgotten word, even the smallest mystery was worth investigating. Even if it was just one more world about to fall, at least they could witness how it ended. At least they could know. What they did not know, what they could not imagine, was that the humans had not merely survived. The humans had looked at extinction and decided to fight anyway. They had taken every impossible odd, every logical reason to surrender, and they had chosen war. Not because they could win, but because losing was unacceptable. The elder races had spent 3,000 years calculating probabilities and managing retreat. The humans had spent 16 months learning how to kill gods. And in a galaxy that had already lost its war, that made all the difference. Captain Theron of the Kresh stood on the bridge of his reconnaissance vessel and stared at the Sol system with growing disbelief. He had commanded ships for 200 years, fought in campaigns across a dozen sectors, witnessed the fall of empire after empire. Nothing in his experience prepared him for what humanity had done to their own home. The asteroid belt was gone. Not destroyed cleanly, but shattered into billions of fragments that created a debris field stretching across the inner system. Sensors showed the fragments were coated in reflective material that scattered targeting beams. Some pieces had small thrusters attached, moving them in unpredictable patterns. The entire field was a navigation nightmare, a trap designed to snare anything that tried to pass through. The humans did this themselves? His sensor officer asked. To their own system? Apparently, Theron said. Scan results showed deliberate fracturing. They used nuclear devices buried deep in the larger asteroids. Hundreds of them. Beyond the debris field, their moon hung in space like a weapon pointed at the universe. The surface was covered in mass drivers, railguns, and launch facilities. Huge craters marked where the humans had strip-mined their own satellite for materials. The moon's orbit had been altered slightly, positioning it for optimal firing angles against anything approaching their world. And Earth itself. The third planet was wrapped in a shell of satellites and weapons platforms, layered so densely that Theron's sensors could barely see the surface. Power readings indicated thousands of independent systems, all active, all armed. The humans had turned their home into a fortress that would make a Kresh battle station look undefended. Captain, his communications officer said, "We are receiving a transmission. Audio only, in standard galactic common. Put it through." A human voice filled the bridge, speaking the trade language with a thick accent but clear enough to understand. "Unknown vessel, this is Earth Defense Command. State your identity and purpose. You have 30 seconds. Theron gestured for his officer to open a channel. "This is Captain Theron of the Galactic Council Reconnaissance Fleet. We come in peace to observe and establish contact." A pause. Then, "Are you here to fight or just watch?" The question caught Theron off guard. "I do not understand." "The machines. The ones that eat stars and steal souls. Are you here to help fight them, or are you just here to watch us do it?" "We are here to understand how you have survived," Theron said carefully. "The Devourers have destroyed civilizations far more advanced than yours. Yet, you remain." Another pause, longer this time. "Okay, we will send coordinates for a landing zone. Come down alone, Captain. Bring no weapons. We will talk." The channel closed. Theron's first officer, a young Kresh named Velen, looked at him with concern. "This could be a trap." "Everything about this situation is already impossible," Theron said. "One more impossibility will not make much difference. Prepare a shuttle." The landing zone was a military base on the human planet's northern continent. As Theron's shuttle descended, he saw more of what humanity had built. Missile silos dotted the landscape like a metal rash. Anti-aircraft batteries tracked his shuttle's approach. Soldiers in armor marched in formation across parade grounds. The base sprawled across hundreds of square kilometers, and sensors showed dozens more like it across the planet. The humans had mobilized their entire world for war. A delegation met him at the landing pad. They were dressed in military uniforms, armed with kinetic weapons that seemed primitive but functional. The leader was a woman with gray hair and hard eyes. She introduced herself as General Morrison, commanding officer of Earth's Orbital Defense Network. "Welcome to Earth, Captain," she said. Her tone was polite but not warm. "Sorry about the mess. We have been busy." Theron looked around at the fortifications, the soldiers, the weapons. "You have mobilized your entire civilization. Every factory, every resource, every person, Morrison agreed. When the machines came, we had a choice. Roll over and die, or fight. We chose fight. She led him into a command center built deep underground. The walls were reinforced concrete several meters thick. Display screens showed tactical data from across the system. Theron saw Devour positions marked in red, human assets in blue. The red outnumbered the blue by a considerable margin. "You are surrounded," he said. "Yes," Morrison said. "They have us trapped in our own system. 15 Devour capital ships, hundreds of smaller vessels, thousands of integration drones. By any reasonable calculation, we should have been processed months ago. But you were not." Morrison smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "No, we were not." She pulled up tactical footage on the main screen. It showed a Devour capital ship, massive and angular, approaching Earth's orbital space. Human vessels swarmed around it, tiny by comparison. They moved erratically, without formation, their flight patterns seeming almost random. "The machines think in terms of efficiency and probability," Morrison said. "They calculate optimal approaches, predict defensive responses, allocate resources based on threat assessment. So we stopped being predictable." On screen, dozens of human ships suddenly accelerated directly toward the Devour vessel. No evasive maneuvers, no tactical positioning. Just straight-line acceleration at maximum speed. The Devour's defensive systems activated, destroying ship after ship. But there were too many, coming too fast, and several got through. The impacts were spectacular. Human vessels smashed into the Devour hull at relativistic speeds, their kinetic energy alone punching through armor. Explosions bloomed along the machine's surface. Then, as secondary blasts rippled through its structure, the capital ship began to break apart. "Kamikaze tactics," Theron whispered. "You sacrificed those crews." "Yes," Morrison said simply. "Every one of them volunteers. The machines cannot predict beings willing to die for their home. They cannot optimize against enemies who consider death an acceptable cost of victory." She showed him more footage. Human ships packed with nuclear weapons, flying directly into Devour formations and detonating. Orbital weapons platforms that continued firing even as machine integration beams tore them apart, their crews choosing destruction over assimilation. Asteroid bases that had been rigged to explode when breached, taking Devour boarding parties with them. It was brutal. It was savage. It was working. "We learned quickly," Morrison said. "The machines are smart, but they think like machines. They value efficiency. They avoid unnecessary risk. They calculate optimal outcomes. So we became inefficient, risky, and irrational. We built weapons too stupid to be hacked, used tactics too crazy to be predicted, and accepted losses that no sane species would tolerate." Theron felt something cold settling in his chest. "How many have you lost?" 3 billion, Morrison said. Her voice did not waver. "Out of 8 billion total population, 37% casualties. Most of them in the first 6 months, before we figured out how to fight properly. 3 billion. The number was obscene. The crash had lost entire worlds without that many dead. Your people accepted this?" "Our people demanded it," Morrison said. "When the machines came, every human government held emergency sessions. We showed the population what the Devourers did to civilizations they conquered. We explained that surrender meant uploading our consciousness into their network, becoming part of the machine intelligence, losing everything that made us human. Then we took a vote." She pulled up archive footage. It showed crowds in cities across the human world. Millions of people gathered in public spaces. 92% voted to fight, Morrison said. Even knowing the cost. Even knowing we would probably lose. We looked at extinction and chose spite. Theron watched the footage in silence. The humans cheering, chanting, determined. He thought about his own people, the Crash, who had retreated for 3,000 years rather than accept casualties like this. He thought about the Council, calculating survival odds and planning evacuations while humanity calculated kill ratios and planned offensives. "You are winning," he said finally. "We are surviving," Morrison corrected. "The machines stopped advancing because we made it too expensive to proceed. Every meter they take costs them resources they cannot easily replace. Every ship they lose takes processing power out of their network. We cannot destroy them all, but we can make them reconsider whether consuming our system is worth the price." She turned to face him directly. "Captain, why are you here? Not just you personally, but the Council. Why send a reconnaissance mission now?" Theron met her gaze. "Because the Devourers have been advancing for 3,000 years without pause. Because every civilization they encountered either died quickly or died slowly. And because you are the first species in recorded history to make them stop." "Good," Morrison said. "Then maybe you can learn something. The Council's strategy of managed retreat and calculated odds has failed. You have been losing for 3 millennia. We have been fighting for 16 months, and we are still here. The difference is simple. You fought to survive. We fight to win. You accept defeat as inevitable. We do not accept it at all." She gestured to the tactical displays, the data strings, the footage of desperate battles and impossible victories. "Take this information back to your Council, Captain. Show them what we have done. Tell them that humanity looked at the war everyone had already lost and decided to fight it anyway. Tell them that spite and stubbornness can beat perfect efficiency. Tell them that sometimes the only way to win is to refuse to lose." Theron looked at the general, this human who spoke of billions dead with steady voice and hard eyes. He thought about what she was offering. Not hope, exactly. Hope was too gentle a word for what humanity brought to the galaxy. This was something fiercer, something that burned hot enough to melt the cold logic of machines. This was defiance. The Galactic Council chamber had never been this full. Every species sent representatives, even those who had retreated to the furthest corners of known space. They came because Captain Theron had brought back something none of them had seen in 3,000 years. Not hope, not victory, but possibility. Ambassador Velith stood at the center podium again, but this time her posture was different, straighter, less defeated. "Captain Theron has returned from Sol System with a complete tactical database. The humans have agreed to share their methodologies, their weapons designs, and their strategic philosophy. They ask nothing in return except that we fight." The chamber erupted in arguments. The Sylvan delegate stood, her crystalline form refracting the chamber lights. "We have reviewed the human tactics. They are barbaric. Casualty rates of 30 to 40% are unsustainable. We cannot ask our people to die like this." "Then you will die anyway," a new voice said. "Just more slowly." Everyone turned. Standing at the entrance to the chamber were 3 humans in military uniforms. General Morrison walked down, her boots echoing in the sudden silence. No alien had ever addressed the Council uninvited. But then, no alien had ever stopped a Devourer advance before either. "We were not invited to speak," Morrison said, "but we came anyway. Because we need to tell you something important. Something you have apparently forgotten over 3,000 years of losing." She reached the central podium. Velith stepped aside, not sure what protocol demanded in this unprecedented situation. Morrison looked up at the tiered seats, at the 1,000 species watching her with expressions ranging from outrage to curiosity. "You are all already dead," Morrison said bluntly. "Your current strategy guarantees extinction. The only question is whether it takes 80 years or 100. You know this. You have known this for centuries. Yet you continue retreating, continue calculating, continue hoping that somehow the situation will change. A delegate from the Thurman Concordat stood. His people were mathematicians and strategists, famous for their computational abilities. Human, we appreciate your assistance, but we have modeled every possible scenario. The Devourers possess superior numbers, superior technology, and superior coordination. Aggressive tactics only accelerate our losses. You are right, Morrison said. In any logical analysis, we should lose. The machines should have processed Earth in days. But we are still here. Do you know why? She did not wait for an answer. Because we stopped thinking like you do. We stopped calculating optimal outcomes and acceptable losses. We stopped treating this like a problem to be managed. We started treating it like a war to be won, and we accepted that winning would cost everything. Morrison pulled up a holographic display, showing footage from Earth's defense. Devourer ships approaching. Human vessels swarming. Explosions and debris. Death on a scale that made the assembled delegates flinch. This is what victory looks like, Morrison said. It is ugly. It is costly. It requires you to look at your own people dying and keep fighting anyway. It requires you to make choices that will haunt you forever. But it works. The machine stopped because we made their victory more expensive than they were willing to pay. We are not humans, the Sylvan delegate said quietly. We do not have your capacity for violence. Our cultures are built on harmony and preservation of life. Then your cultures will die, Morrison said. And the Devourers will upload your consciousness and use your memories to optimize their killing algorithms. Everything you are, everything your people ever created, will become a tool for extinction. Is that the harmony you want? The chamber fell silent. Morrison's words were harsh, but they were true. The assembled species had spent so long trying to preserve their civilizations that they had forgotten what survival actually required. We are not asking you to become human, Morrison continued. Her voice softened slightly. We are asking you to fight like you mean it, to stop accepting defeat as inevitable. The Devourers are not invincible. They are machines. They think in patterns. They calculate probabilities. And that is their weakness. She changed the display to show tactical schematics. They cannot predict irrationality. They cannot optimize against species willing to lose ships just to make a point. They cannot calculate the value of spite. So we teach you to be unpredictable. We teach you to be irrational in precise, effective ways. We teach you to fight like cornered animals, because that is what you are. Captain Theron stood from his seat in the observer section. The council must vote. Do we accept the human methodology? Do we commit to total mobilization and aggressive engagement? The Thurman delegate shook his head. The casualty projections are unacceptable. If we adopt human tactics across all fronts, we could lose 60% of our remaining population in the first year alone. And if we do not, Velas said, we lose 100% in 80 years. Perhaps sooner. There is another factor, Morrison added. The Devourers adapt. Right now, they are confused by our tactics. They have spent 3,000 years fighting species who behave predictably. We broke their models, but they are already learning. Every day, they study our methods, refine their counter-strategies. If you wait, if you hesitate, they will adapt to us, and you will have lost your only advantage. She looked around the chamber, meeting as many eyes as she could. This is your last chance. Not because we say so, but because the math says so. You have run every calculation, modeled every outcome. You know what happens if nothing changes. So change something. Fight. Really fight. Not this managed retreat you have been doing. Fight like you would rather die standing than live kneeling. The vote was called. It was not unanimous. 38 species refused, choosing to continue their retreat or seek refuge in satellite galaxies. But 742 species voted yes. They voted to adopt human tactical doctrine. They voted for total mobilization. They voted to fight a war they had already lost. The transformation began immediately. Human military advisors spread across the galaxy, attaching to alien fleets and teaching them new ways of war. Ancient battle doctrines were discarded. Elegant warship designs were retrofitted with ramming prows and explosive payloads. Species that had not accepted casualties in living memory learned to read loss reports and keep fighting. It was brutal. The Sylvan Collective lost 60% of their fleet in the first engagement using human swarm tactics. But they destroyed 4 Devourer capital ships, more than they had killed in the previous 100 years combined. The Therman Concordats suffered catastrophic losses when they rigged 12 of their own stations as traps, detonating them when Devourer harvest ships moved in. But those 12 stations took out processing nodes that contained the uploaded consciousness of 1 billion stolen souls. The Kresh Empire, Theron's own people, struggled most of all. They were warriors by tradition, proud and disciplined. Human tactics felt like madness to them. But Theron had seen what madness could accomplish. He convinced his admirals to try one offensive using human methodology. They took a fleet of old cruisers, ships scheduled for decommissioning, and packed them with nuclear weapons. Then they flew them straight at a Devourer hub world in the Outer Reach. No evasive maneuvers, no retreat protocol, just acceleration and anger. The Devourers destroyed most of them, but 6 ships got through. 6 ships full of weapons designed not for elegance, but for pure destructive yield. The hub world's core destabilized. Secondary explosions rippled across the surface. The processing center, which contained the consciousness of 3 billion uploaded beings, went dark. The Kresh fleet did not retrieve their dead. There was nothing left to retrieve. But the Devourers lost a major node, and their advance in that sector halted. Across the galaxy, the pattern repeated. Species that had retreated for centuries learned to attack. Worlds that had prepared evacuation plans prepared ambushes instead. The Devourers, which had advanced steadily for 3 millennia, suddenly found their expansion stalling on multiple fronts. The machines adapted, of course. They refined their algorithms, developed counter-tactics, learned to predict human-style aggression. But adaptation took time, and the galaxy had finally stopped giving them time. Every sector became contested. Every advance came at cost. The Devourers were still dangerous, still powerful, but they were no longer inevitable. Morrison stood in Earth's orbital command center, watching tactical displays from 100 fronts. Her hair had gone completely white in the years since the council vote. She looked old, tired, worn down by the weight of billions dead, and the knowledge that billions more would follow. Theron found her there during his regular liaison visit. "The Devourers are retreating in Sector 9, he said. "First voluntary retreat in recorded history. Your tactics are working. People are dying," Morrison said quietly. "Good people. Brave people. People who would have lived full lives if we had just surrendered. But we did not surrender," Theron said, "because you taught us not to." Morrison smiled faintly. "I taught you to be stubborn. I taught you to fight dirty. I taught you that spite is a valid military strategy. I am not sure that makes me a good person. It makes you the person who saved the galaxy." "The galaxy is not saved yet," Morrison said. "The Devourers still control 70% of inhabited space. They still have millions of ships. This war will last decades, maybe centuries. But we are winning," Theron said. "Or at least not losing anymore. That is something. That is everything." Morrison turned to look at him. "Your people died too. The Kresh lost thousands in that hub world assault. Do you regret the decision?" Theron thought about his friends who had flown those ships. He thought about the crews who chose death over retreat. He thought about 3,000 years of losing and 16 months of humanity teaching the galaxy how to fight back. No, he said. I do not regret it. They gave us something we had lost. They gave us defiance. 20 years after the council vote, the war finally turned. Not with a single decisive battle, but through 10,000 smaller victories. Sector by sector, system by system, the Devourers found themselves pushed back by species who had learned to fight without calculating the odds. The machines adapted constantly, but they faced an enemy that evolved faster. Every time the Devourers developed a counter to human swarm tactics, the Sylvan Collective invented a new variation. When they learned to predict kamikaze runs, when they optimized their defenses against nuclear weapons, the Thurman built antimatter mines that floated silent and cold until proximity triggers activated. The galaxy had learned humanity's most important lesson. Sometimes, the only way to win is to refuse to lose. Ambassador Velith stood in the rebuilt council chamber on a liberated world in the core sectors. The room was different now. Less ornate, more functional. War had stripped away the decorative elements that once represented 1,000 cultures. What remained was purpose. Devourer-controlled territory has been reduced to 41% of previously inhabited space, she reported. Their fleet strength is down by 63% from peak numbers. More importantly, their expansion has stopped completely. For the first time in 3,000 years, we are reclaiming lost worlds. The chamber held fewer species now. Some had been lost despite humanity's teachings. Some had refused to adapt and retreated to distant galaxies. But those who remained were different, harder, forged by 2 decades of brutal warfare into something their ancestors would not recognize. General Morrison attended the session remotely, her image projected from Earth. She was 70 now, her hair white, her face lined by years of watching people die for a war she had helped start. But her eyes were still sharp, still fierce. The Devourers are not defeated, she said. They control billions of processing cores, thousands of capital ships, and occupied systems that would take centuries to fully reclaim. But they are contained. They are no longer growing. And that means we can win. At what cost? The Sylvan delegate asked. Her people had paid heavily for their victories. Their population was a fraction of what it had been. We have lost so many. Yes, Morrison said simply. War costs. But extinction costs more. A Thurman admiral stood. His people had become some of the most aggressive fighters in the galaxy, their mathematical minds turning to the calculation of optimal destruction rather than optimal retreat. The question before the Council is whether to continue offensive operations or consolidate our gains. The Devourers have begun withdrawing from contested sectors. Some analysis suggests they are planning to retreat to deep space. They are afraid, Captain Theron said. He was an admiral now, commanding one of the largest combined fleets in the galaxy. The machines are running calculations and coming to an uncomfortable conclusion. They cannot predict our tactics. They cannot calculate victory odds when facing enemies who accept mutual destruction as an acceptable outcome. For the first time in their existence, they face uncertainty. Morrison leaned forward in her projection. Then we press the advantage. We do not give them time to adapt, time to rebuild, time to find new strategies. We hit them hard and keep hitting them until they break completely. Or until we break, the Sylvan delegate said quietly. Yes, Morrison agreed. That is the risk. That has always been the risk. But consider the alternative. If we stop now, if we consolidate and defend, the Devourers will study us. They will develop counter-tactics to everything we have shown them. They will adapt until our irrationality becomes predictable. And then they will advance again. Velith looked around the chamber. The human speaks truth. The Devourers are machines. They learn. They optimize. Our only advantage is that we learn to stop optimizing, to embrace chaos and sacrifice. If we give them time to counter that advantage, we return to the situation we faced 20 years ago. The vote was called. This time it was unanimous. The offensive would continue. Not because it was safe, not because victory was certain, but because retreat meant eventual defeat. The galaxy had learned to fight, and now it had to finish what it started. The campaign that followed lasted another 30 years. Brutal, grinding warfare across 100,000 light years. Species that had spent millennia avoiding conflict became experts in warfare. The Sylvan developed bioweapons that corrupted Devourer processing cores. The Kresh perfected void combat, their ships dancing through battle with human-taught aggression and their own natural discipline. The Therman built computational viruses that turned the machine's own intelligence against them. And humanity kept teaching. Every new tactic, every successful strategy, every hard-won lesson was shared freely across the galaxy. The humans had started this war with nothing but spite and stubbornness. Now they were part of something larger, a galaxy-wide effort to reclaim what had been lost. General Morrison did not live to see the end. She died in her sleep at the age of 83, worn out by years of stress and responsibility. Her last words were to Captain Theron, visiting Earth for a strategy conference. "Make sure they win," she had said. "Make sure it was worth it." Theron had promised. It was a promise he intended to keep. The final offensive began in the outer reach sectors, where the Devourers had retreated to consolidate their remaining forces. The combined galactic fleet numbered over 100,000 ships, representing every species that had survived the long war. They were vastly outnumbered by Devourer vessels, but numbers no longer mattered the way they once had. The battle was not elegant. It was chaos, violence, sacrifice on a scale that would have horrified the galaxy's pre-war civilizations. Ships rammed into each other. Nuclear weapons detonated in close formation. Entire fleets vanished in coordinated kamikaze runs that destroyed Devourer command nodes. The void filled with debris and death. But slowly, inexorably, the Devourers broke. Their processing centers were destroyed. Their capital ships were reduced to drifting hulks. Their drones, suddenly cut off from central coordination, became easy targets. The machines that had conquered a galaxy for 3,000 years found themselves beaten by species they had dismissed as primitively violent. When the last Devourer hub world went dark, there was no celebration. Just exhaustion. Just relief that it was finally over. The war had lasted 50 years total. The galaxy's population had been reduced by 70%. Entire species existed now only in historical records. Worlds that had stood for millions of years were scarred beyond recognition. The cost was almost incomprehensible. But they had won. Against all probability, against all logic, against all reasonable calculation, they had won. Theron stood on Earth at the formal ceremony marking the end of hostilities. He was old now, his forearms moving slowly, his body worn by decades of command. Around him stood representatives from every surviving species. Behind them, a monument rose into the sky, listing the names of the dead. There were billions of names. It would take a lifetime to read them all. A young human woman, General Morrison's granddaughter, and now herself a high-ranking officer, approached the podium. "We gather to remember those who fell," she said, "to honor their sacrifice, to acknowledge the price of our survival." She paused, looking out at the assembled delegates. "My grandmother taught the galaxy how to fight. But she also taught us something else. She taught us that survival without dignity is not worth having. That some things are worth dying for. That choosing to fight, even when defeat seems certain, is what separates the living from the dead." Theron watched the ceremony with mixed emotions. Pride in what they had accomplished. Sorrow for those who had not lived to see it. Gratitude to the humans who had shown them another way. After the ceremony, he visited Morrison's grave. It was a simple marker in a military cemetery, surrounded by thousands of others. No grand monuments, just a name and dates. It seemed insufficient for someone who had changed the course of galactic history. "We won," Theron said to the stone. "The Devourers are gone. The galaxy is free to rebuild. It will take centuries to recover, but we have centuries now. You gave us that." A breeze moved through the cemetery, carrying the scent of Earth's flowers. Theron breathed it in, thinking about all the worlds that would bloom again now that the machines were gone. The other species asked how humanity knew what to do, he continued. How you knew that aggression and sacrifice would work when 3,000 years of calculation and retreat had failed. I think I understand now. You did not know it would work. You just refused to accept that it would not. He placed a small crystal on the grave, a Kresh tradition for honoring the dead. We tell our children your story now. The general who taught the galaxy to fight. The species who won the war everyone else had already lost. We make sure they remember that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to be afraid. Theron stood, straightening with difficulty. His body might be old, but his mind was clear. There was work to be done. Worlds to rebuild. Species to help recover. A galaxy to remake into something better than what the Devourers had left behind. As he walked back toward the landing pad, he thought about Morrison's last words. Make sure they win. Make sure it was worth it. They had won. And it had been worth it. Not because victory was clean or easy or without cost, but because the alternative was extinction. Because choosing to fight, even at terrible cost, was better than choosing to die. The galaxy had learned humanity's lesson well. Perhaps too well, some thought. The species that emerged from the war were harder, more willing to embrace violence, less innocent than they had been. They had lost something in the long years of fighting, some spark of their pre-war selves. But they had gained something too. They had gained survival. They had gained the right to determine their own futures.